It's not like you said this morning at breakfast, it's not a technology problem, it's a human problem.
Could be called Michiganians or something cool sounding like that.
Yeah, something that's interesting.
But we're Michiganders now, I guess. Okay. So here we are.
Interesting.
Blame Abraham Lincoln.
People ask me, who's your favorite pastor? Who's the greatest pastor in the world? He says, I don't know, because I've never met him.
Yeah.
Because he is probably like a pastor of 15, 20 people.
Yes.
This is
Disruption.
Welcome back to Disruption, everybody. I'm your host, Alex Sikma, joined by my other host,
Stefan Walicord.
Joined by my other host,
Nehemiah Shaw.
Yeah, he's back. We brought him back.
It's
ladies
a throwback
and gentlemen.
Episode, folks. Throwback episode.
The throwback episode.
It's too early in the morning to be recording a podcast.
I know. Now we recorded an episode now late at night one time, and now we're recording it early in the morning.
It's true. Mm-hmm. All for you.
All for you.
You beautiful people.
Yeah. This is where your donor dollars are going.
Billions of donor dollars.
Towards us waking up early.
Is there any specific special reason why we decided to an early morning podcast recording with a throwback host?
I think it was me, actually, like the timing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
do it in the morning.
Specifically, why we wanted to get a throwback host back on Disruption.
All right, let me tell a little story for y'all. So first of all, Stefan was like, wait a minute, we're coming up on, guess, episode 50. This is a milestone
let's go.
Type episode. And so Stefan was like, when we're coming up on episode 50, we should come up with like something special.
We should do something to celebrate.
So like one of the things we decided to do was shout out to Trent.
Trent Davis, my friend from Ohio.
Yeah. Okay. So this is Stefan's friend from Ohio, and he's like some business entrepreneur mindset.
Absolute brilliant
he's like
genius.
The Elon Musk.
Go get him guy.
Yeah. He's like the Elon Musk of tomorrow.
Of the homemade t-shirt industry.
And so we got these awesome Disruption t-shirts, and we didn't get one for Nehemiah. We probably should have thought that one through. But this is going on outside.
Yes, we did this before we planned to have a guest on.
I'd probably rip it.
Yeah,
just too strong.
He's too
strong.
So yeah, then we were like, make these t-shirts. It'd be awesome. And so he started making on them, and they look awesome and super cool. So I was typing away on my laptop, like sitting in Rockford in this what's it, quick water? I used to say slow lands, but it's quick water. And then suddenly
so stupid.
Then Nehemiah walks in, and I'm like, whoa, like that's crazy. I'm working on like Disruption stuff right now. We're thinking of what we're gonna do for episode 50. And I was like, I need to like bring you on. Like that was going through my mind. I was like, I've got to bring back the old hosts, like I feel like you're like some old timer, like some old folks home. But
we found him at the retirement home, and we're like, we're gonna bring you back for one last mission.
I didn't tell my mom I'm coming on here. I'm just gonna send it to her after the
nice
episode drops.
That'd be awesome. Yeah, it's like super surprise. Hopefully Josh can still come in because I invited him a bunch of times. But if he comes in the middle of the episode, then we're gonna have him in too. But
we'll edit this out.
50 episodes. And we have breached the 100 subscribers mark as well. So that's something worth celebrating.
Yeah.
Big round of applause to all you beautiful people out there.
I'm going to put in some like sound effect.
We'll add it in post.
Yeah. We'll do it in post.
Big round of applause in post. And we're also, we're not just going to party it up and celebrate today. We're also going to have an interesting topic very much related to what we do podcasting. We're going to talk about podcasting. We're going to talk about the internet. Mm-hmm. We're going to ask, was the internet a mistake? And we're just going to engage in information technology and doing Christian mission using the power of technology. So it's going to be really exciting today. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to this.
I want to dive into that. But first, I just want to catch up a little bit just so the audience knows kind of what's going on in Nehemiah's life, because he's been MIA for a while. And so
I think you mentioned February was your last episode?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was February because he moved out. Yeah, so I'm just going to catch us up, I guess.
Well, I got promoted at work, and they asked me to open up a branch in Saginaw, which is just the armpit of Michigan. If you're from Saginaw, I'm sorry. Horrible place. Horrible people. Don't go. The place sucks. But no, it was.
We'll edit that out.
We'll edit that out. No, it's so I got promoted. I had opened up a branch for the company I worked for, and then about 4 or 5 months in, they were like, "Hey man, we need to open up the Chicago branch," and it was happening a lot quicker than we thought. And my plan was always to move out of Saginaw. It was just kind of like a stepping stone for me, kind of strategically in the business. And then they made the announcement. Victor made the announcement that we need someone for this job as a sales manager in Chicago. And then I went to my boss, who was the chief sales officer, and I said, "Hey, I'll do it if you want me to," because I was the only one that is unmarried and without kids. So I put my name out there, and then within a month, I was living in Chicago.
Nice.
So now I'm selling roofs in Chicago, and
That's
that place
pretty
is
exciting.
way better than Saginaw.
We got
The only reason he left was
Disruption does not approve of the message of slander against the city of Saginaw as an organization. We're going to put up a big black disclaimer or something like that. Not disruption approved.
Not disruption approved.
Don't go to Saginaw.
We just let him. He's pleading in the background.
Gosh.
That's funny.
Oh, great. Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of where I've been.
that's the story.
The
Yeah.
Windy City, huh?
The Windy
Yep.
City.
Windy
They
City.
actually call it. You know why they call it the Windy City?
I assume it's because of all the wind.
No, it's not because of all the wind.
Okay.
It's because there used to be a bunch of I'm going to chop this up badly, but
Okay.
there used to be a bunch of politicians from Chicago. You know how they would say blowing smoke? These guys just blowing smoke. So I think it was New York said that about Chicago. It's like, oh, it's a windy city. Everyone's blowing smoke.
That's funny.
Sure is.
That reminds me of another story. How the inhabitants of Michigan got the name Michiganders. Apparently, it was something that Abraham Lincoln said while dissing a politician from Michigan. He referred to him as a Michigander, which was a joke because it's like a goose, like a gander, right? So he was dissing him, and that stuck. And now everybody says Michigander, even though it's kind of a ridiculous name for people in a specific state.
Yeah, I was gonna say the first
We're
time
in
I've
Grand Rapids,
heard
by
that
the way,
name-
so-
the first time I
Yeah.
heard that name, I was like, "That's ridiculous. Why we call ourselves a
Exactly.
weird name?" But
Exactly.
if that's the backstory.
Because we could be called Michiganians or something cool sounding like that.
Yeah, something that's interesting.
But we're Michiganders now, I guess.
Okay.
So here we are.
Interesting.
Blame Abraham Lincoln.
So that's my life update. Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, yeah. Great to have you on. And so we wanted to talk about what is that?
Don't go to Saginaw.
Can we zoom up on that? Luke, who's editing, can we zoom up on that?
We're going to do a lot of work
Nothing.
on this in post.
I said I wasn't allowed to say it anymore.
So that's the other thing is so the one change from Disruption that we had since you left was we actually start editing our episodes now. We used to have it where it was just let's just go straight through without chopping
it's
anything
way
out.
more fun, dude. I'm gonna
And,
get hard on y'all.
Our editor is going to earn his keep that we don't pay him.
We're gonna start paying you.
Yeah.
We should
They
start.
actually told me
honestly.
that before this episode, is that we're going to start paying you because you've been putting so much hard work in. And so
We're going to cut that.
We're gonna give you a salary.
We're going to cut that. Thank
We'll
you.
edit this out.
God bless all the brave volunteers who help us with everything we do. And by all the brave volunteers, I mean Luke. Thank you, Luke.
You're doing a
Luke
great job.
and Trent
That's
doing a
true.
great job.
Luke and Trent.
and Stefan and me and yeah.
We don't count as volunteers.
Our team is-
We have to run this operation.
Yeah.
We're the managers. Somebody give me a new title. I want to be a co-director now.
How much would it take, say, if the podcast blows up? How much would you ever sell it, you think? Would you ever sell the name Disruption? You have a guest come on and they're like, you know what? I want to take this over. I'm going to give you $1 million.
Man. In ministry, if we're obviously joking around, so when we talk about millions of dollars, but if that was real, I would be like, what is going on? My life would be so surreal.
Also, yes, I will sell it for $1 million.
I don't know what I would do. I think so. I would kind of still want it to be. See, I am confronted with this, and this is a little bit more alongside of what we want to talk about in this episode was just disruption, and then podcasting in general, and then out broad to the media and information age in general. But starting with disruption, what this is about, I was actually given sort of, I don't know, because when I started working at Puritan, Dr. Neely came up to me and was like, you got a lot of different things going on. Whoops, I hit the microphone. You have a lot of different things going on. Why don't you just quit all of them and just work at Puritan and go to school at Puritan? And I keep thinking about that. I'm like, I don't know, because like we just like got this milestone with disruption. We got this, but then I was thinking about like, okay, so we have Luke as the editor, and Stefan's running the topics and stuff like that, and maybe Trent would be more involved with like merchandise or something if that's his interest, and like Daniel wants to do like some kind of production thing or something like that. And I like still keep thinking about that, like what would it be like to like just step it out of this, because it's like I was thinking this morning when I was doing my devotions, and I was thinking like 1 year ago, I mean not to this day, but like 1 year ago roughly, I was thinking, yeah, I'm going to start a podcast, and it's like here we are, you know, like this is my little baby that's kind of like grown up with me. What would it be like to just like let that baby go and be like, all right, you're on your own, like you've got this whole operation that you can just continue by yourself? What would that be like? But I don't know, like I'm still like deciding, like, do I let this go or do I stick with it? Because I definitely have not a lot of time anymore, like so we've been kind of thinking about rescheduling when we want to record these or when we want to do planning things, because I need to figure out how to allot my time.
Well, but, if you keep things the exact same way forever, eventually things will just, you know,
right. Eventually
settle.
You run out of you either run out of time or you settle into a routine.
Exactly.
Kind of.
Yeah, exactly. And so if you're not moving, you know, if you're not changing and moving around and stuff, and even, I mean, last time I was here, we were sitting in a different location, you know?
Yeah.
Now the place looks a lot different. You know, there was a bit of a facelift, and I think that's a plus. That's the direction you should be moving. And so
we have been putting a lot of work into growing both how we do this and like who's involved. So I think we definitely do have a big opportunity to like continue turning this into something that's both manageable for us to work on. And more impactful as it continues to grow, which has been really cool for me because it's been something for me to invest in. It's been something that I believe in and want to, you know, continue putting effort into finding time to do stuff like that.
And so you say when choosing who to involve in the podcast, then that's a really wise thing, because we talk about before how there's a lot of people that want to get on the podcast because they watch a podcast and they watch these little clips from podcasts and they try to make their friends laugh and they have an idea of what it looks like, and maybe you can do something pretty clever for 15 seconds, you know, and they hope that gets clipped, but then what are you doing for the rest of the time? Right. You know, for 45 minutes, the rest of the time, what are you just going to sit there? Yeah. And so being intentional with who you have on, I think, is a really wise thing.
Absolutely.
I think podcasting, I feel like it's going to become a form of social media one day, you know? Oh, like remember Sam? Remember that guy? Crazy guy. I wonder what Sam's up to right now. I'm going to log into his podcast.
Too. I know, I want to.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, I was like...
hypothetically.
I'm going to log into Sam's podcast and see what he's chit-chatting about today.
It's like journaling, but the whole world gets to see your train of thought and, you know, your...
Yeah, it seems a bit dangerous.
Yes.
Everyone gets that.
And that's part of the reason why this isn't just like the Stefan and Alex podcast. This is the Disruption podcast. We're disrupting culture. We're centering Christ. Like, that's why we take a very missional approach, because we don't just want it to be stream of consciousness nonsense. You know, we want to very much emphasize the mission that we have here and stuff like that. Yeah. And that's why you're talking about being critical about who you actually have on, you know. Anybody can be clever for 15 seconds. That's exactly why we put so much effort into that, because we do care about what ends up happening here and what kinds of conversations actually get put out.
And at the same time, that doesn't mean that you just hire people that agree or invite people that agree with you.
Right.
It means that you invite people very intentionally. Maybe you do have, you know, someone who has an exact different mindset, someone I think it would be really interesting to see someone who's maybe more ideological and even combative. Yeah. You know, something that is you might leave the church kind of like quaking in your boots a little bit, like, ooh, that was a tough conversation. Yeah. You know, like those are the ones that we're looking for, not necessarily conversations that are just, I guess, fluffy, you know.
Right. Yeah.
I think like with the internet, like with podcasting, because it's available to anybody and everyone. And just, I feel like a year ago or 2 years ago, if you said, I want to make a podcast,
Yeah.
This guy, dude.
Well, except in
Come on,
2020,
dude.
a lot of people were starting
Everybody
podcasts.
started podcasts.
I guess it was,
in
yeah.
2020.
I guess, yeah. Yes, I guess in 2019, like before COVID, it
Yeah.
was like a podcast.
Right, but podcasting
Joe
is
Rogan,
like
Joe
the
Rogan.
truck
and that's
drivers do podcasts, right? Like who does that?
So
Yeah.
lame.
Yeah.
That is so lame. But now it's becoming such a big thing. And I like it. I listen to more podcasts than I do music when I'm driving. And I do a lot of driving.
Oh yeah.
And so if you do it well, it can be a very valuable thing. It can be a really valuable thing. Or it can just be a huge waste of time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think I remember seeing there's memes about how it's like, oh yeah, podcasting equipment should require a license because there's way too many people who have podcasts that shouldn't have podcasts. And I always find that very amusing. And, every day I wake up in the morning and think I'm trying to earn the right to have a podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't actually think that, but I do take that seriously when we do disruption. It's kind of like, that's something we're intentionally living into.
Mm-hmm.
That's what was crazy about when I first started this podcast. So first of all, this is probably, I said this before when we met for breakfast this morning, but this is probably the biggest thing that I was driving like this whole time, because the projects I was doing before, it was just like I'm collaborating in a song with my brother and it got like 50 views on YouTube or something, like this song, like, and it's just like a little song here, a little song there, an album over here. And I made my own comic books when I was a little kid, but those are just kept to myself. And then this was like the first time I was actually stepping out into something that was like people at 1829 were listening to, like our church youth group was, or young adults.
Projected on remember at 1829?
Yeah.
That big projector. Yeah.
Well, I pushed it out. I made the graphic and then I showed it to Ben.
Yeah.
And I was like, or Ben, not Ben Bessett, by the way, but Ben Phoebus at 1829. Because the first episode I did with me and Josh, I was like super nervous about it because it was going out on Instagram. It was going like people were going to start listening to it. And we went deep in that episode and it was like kind of scary, like pretty vulnerable. And I just remember the first day it went out, it got like 17 views. And I was like really surprised because I was like, when does something that you start for the very first time get like 17 views on the first day? Because like, unless usually it's like 2 views because it's like you and your mom, or
right.
it's like your mom, but she accidentally refreshed it, so now you get 2 views.
Yes.
But like, and then the next day I go out to 1829, and then like this girl like walks up to Josh and was like, I listened to your podcast the other day, and I was like, what is going on?
Deer in the headlights. Like,
I know. I was like, and then Josh was like, yeah, it's with this guy. And then everyone's like, and it's just like, this whole thing is going through my head. It's like, am I qualified for this? Like, I don't have, like, we were all questioning a lot, I think, early on. Like, you, me, and Josh was like, we're young adults. Are we qualified to be putting out this, like, I guess theological content sometimes, philosophical content other times? Is there supposed to be a license for this?
Is there supposed to be a license? Where do we sign up?
It's like,
But I mean, the thing is when what it boils down to is we could just be we were having a very similar conversation an hour ago over breakfast. And the only difference is that there's cameras and mics now.
Exactly.
So what, are we just not gonna, do you have a license to have conversation now?
Get a free speech permit.
Well, the United States is such a great country. This is the greatest country in the United States.
Land of the free, home of the brave. Play some patriotic, copyright-free music in the background.
It's, if you think about it, like why of course you can say whatever and have whatever conversations you want, but then it's when you make it accessible to just the general public, it's like, oh shoot, am I allowed to do this? Should I do this? But that's where, imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
That's where imposter syndrome comes in. And you think, like, why do I have the right to do this?
Yeah.
Well, do it. If you suck, everyone will know.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So either quit or just do it better next time.
Yeah.
I feel like if you're trying to get someone to do, like for you in engineering, you have a certain degree, a certain, say, like license to be able to do a practice that I can't do. I don't think I can confidently spell engineering. I don't think engineers know how to spell engineer.
Engineers don't know how to spell as well as they should.
ENJ.
We have specifically one engineer at my place of work whose spelling skills are bless his heart, but not up to the levels that we would like them to be when you're putting words on prints. But go ahead.
You can do math though.
Yes.
And so like there's certain
Sometimes.
things that you have to, that no one's going to trust you to do unless you have a certain degree in that field to be able to do that.
Right.
I mean, I wouldn't hire you if you're doing what you're doing right now without the training. But this isn't the same thing. And
Right.
I think a lot of people kind of like confuse that. Because the thing about podcasting and just I feel like social media. Would you consider podcasting a form of social media?
It's just
In a certain
it's so
sense.
different, but it is social and it's a
changing.
media.
Yeah.
It's so interesting.
Because I mean, if you do push it out there, maybe 10 years, and my theory of everyone having a podcast, whether or not they're like worth listening to, but like, we all know someone that we like to hear. You know, I feel like if my grandpa had a podcast, I'd be eating up those episodes every day. You know, and he's passed away now. You know, and it's like. That would have been so good to have, and I hope one day if I'm, a good dad and then a good granddad, that my grandkids would like to listen to these. And so, doing them, like learning how to do them well, starting out, I think you guys are at a really good spot. And I would say like continue doing it, just continue doing what you're doing, because with social media, and I was it's funny, the first time I was on the podcast, we talked about Jordan Peterson, but. Jordan Peterson talks a lot about podcasts or social media rather, and he talks about how Twitter or X now is so tough because you have psychopathic people that don't have any kind of repercussions for what they're doing. They can say whatever they want, they can do whatever they want on social media and not be punished for it. Whereas if you say some of these things to someone's face, you're gonna get licked. Someone's going to clobber you if you say some of these things. And I think that's part of why podcasting nowadays is, and I guess maybe not just podcasting, but social media nowadays is so deadly, is because no one has any real consequences. You know what I mean? I mean, you can go online and post whatever you want, as long as it's not like something illegal or going to get taken down.
Unless it goes against the terms of service.
Exactly. You can say whatever you want.
Yeah.
You can just like lean back in your seat. That's what's, I guess, so dangerous about it. That's where discernment comes in.
Yeah, Eric Schmidt was talking about this, and I kind of follow up on Eric Schmidt every so once in a while because he is the ex-CEO. He was the CEO of Google, so I should say. He has these interesting interviews that he has. Well, at Stanford, he did a lecture at Stanford, and then later he did an interview with Diary of a CEO just a couple days ago, and just talking about how when all these new technologies began to come out, they were always asking the question as the creators. They weren't asking, should we do this? They were just asking, can we do it? Can we do this? Because if we could, we should just do it. And they don't even realize the consequences of so when Facebook or Instagram, social media used to be time-based, algorithm was time-based. So the post would come up based on when it was released, I guess. That's how your timeline would get. And now everything is brought up to you based on what is it that you like. Yeah. That comes up first.
Engagement-based algorithms.
It's engagement-based algorithms instead of time. And how it's shaping our brain. And then, of course, this whole thing feeds into the way that you look at just algorithms in general. The stuff that you focus on, that ends up on your YouTube home feed when you first get on YouTube. So if you're into some, I don't know, I don't want to get into conspiracy theories, but let's just say you're into some kind of conspiracy theory about the moon landing. There's going to be another episode that comes up from another YouTube channel about that same topic that you're interested in, and it's giving you this confirmation bias. Oh, this must be true. This must be true simply because it's being pushed to you more and more. And so as this information age continues, what's brought up to you in front of your face first, it's going to be the things that you're interested in. So even though the information is available around the world, people are still segregating into their fields of interest. And so you still have I think this is why the politics are just ramping up more and more. People keep saying that this is going to be the most important election that's ever been in America. Now this election is the most important election. And now this election is the most important election. Or this presidential debate. And I'm still thinking I guess, but it's always been relatively the same. I think people are just more and more interested in it because that's what's being pushed in their faces every time that they're looking at the internet. So I think it's just changing our perception. How much is this election actually going to affect us? You know what I mean?
Engagement-based algorithms definitely have a reputation for helping cement echo chambers. Like YouTube specifically is famous for this. They will essentially push you towards extremist content because if you thought this was cool, wait till you see this. And if you thought that was cool, wait till you see that. And it's going to show you more and more of that. Because what is YouTube incentivized to do? YouTube is incentivized to keep you watching videos. Mm-hmm. So the amount of videos you watch is going to be prioritized. That means they make more ad revenue because it's more videos. And they don't really care what you're watching so long as you keep watching. Mm-hmm. It's the same way a lot of algorithms work. So long as you continue to engage, they continue to make money. And Facebook whatever happens to be similar to what you're watching, they're going to keep pushing you down that track because they know that's what's going to keep you engaged. Yeah. So even in spaces that are free and open and huge, where there's a diversity of viewpoints and opinions and the ability to fact check, often you're being railroaded into a specific corner of that world where there aren't any outside voices, because why would you click the outside voice? It's less likely to make them ad revenue because it's less likely to keep you going down this specific stream of thought and stuff like that.
And it's interesting, there's no way to actually, and we were talking about this at breakfast too, how we're trying to use technology as a tool to shape how we are going to behave as humans. Like, I just wish, when I was a freshman in high school, I wanted to design a computer that when the login screen came up, it gave you like a selection of like what activities did you want to do that day. And if you clicked on a certain one as you log in, that's the interface that you're stuck with. So if you want to do writing, then you select the writing interface and it logs you on to just your writing apps, just your research apps. Like you can find you have an app just for Wikipedia articles and the sources, and then that's all you get. And then you said that's basically
just an old computer from the 80s.
Yeah, the
We've
Commodore.
regressed back. Yeah, Commodore 64. To launch any programs, you had to type in a DOS command or something like that, and it would just launch a single program. Like, so there's no multitasking. There's no Windows. It's just program runs, program isn't running. Those are your only options.
And like Apple does this too, where it's not actually based on retention. So like that's not their business model. Their business model is like, well, we just want you to buy the next product. So because they're not so much focused on retention, they've actually introduced features that they shows you how much time you spend on your screen and it shows you
digital wellness stats on Apple are very detailed.
There's screen time, so you can lock your certain apps and stuff, but then there's always a way to override it.
Right.
So
at the end of the day, you as a human can override the technology because fundamentally we're dealing with the problem of the human heart not wanting to be better. So it's like, you can make it easier to build good habits by using technology. But at the end of the day, if you don't make the choice that you actually want to use the tools available to you, you're not going to get better or change.
Did you I remember you were talking about how you wanted to change your screen, Nehemiah, to black and white. And then how did that go for you? Did you
quit it? Stopped it. Yeah. I didn't. Yeah, it was, the thing is it worked.
Yeah.
It works. You go into your settings and then you turn the display to where everything is just black and white.
Interesting.
And it sucks to look at. Like it really sucks to look at. But then I made the excuse of, well, I'm on my phone a lot for work. I'm shooting like videos of people's roofs on my phone and all this stuff. So I told myself why I should put it back on, which then I go back into the regular routine.
Yeah.
And so it's not like you said this morning at breakfast, it's not a technology problem, it's a human problem. It's a problem of the soul, not a problem of anything outside of me. I know we were having the conversation about, should podcasts be licensed? No. It's like I might be kind of like gun toting, but it's a true fact that it's not a gun problem; it's a human problem when it comes to how people use guns. Same thing with technology; it could be the same thing with podcasts too.
Yeah.
And so I kind of failed. Thanks for bringing that up again, Alex. Gosh, that touchy subject.
I tried to find it in my phone settings just now. Couldn't find the black and white setting.
Oh, really? You don't have an Apple.
I'm sorry. I'm on the inferior phone system. My apologies sincerely
Green
to all of you
text
out there.
bubbles.
Green text bubble.
I have never heard of this green text bubble problem. Like, it sounds like the most Apple complaint somebody could possibly have. Like, that's the least.
Well, you don't have to suffer with it. That's
What do you
the
mean
thing.
suffer? Is the fact that the text bubble is green really that much of
Yes.
a disturbance?
You
It's
don't
terrible.
know, dude.
I guess I don't.
I wanna get,
guess I
like-
just don't
What color
understand.
are your text bubbles?
I can probably change the color.
Oh, dude. Ew.
You mean you can change like the way your interface
You mean
looks?
you have flexibility in
it's
the
not
Android
locked
ecosystem?
to what the manufacturer gives you?
No.
What?
Nonsense.
That's a good point. That is a good point.
One of the interesting things, we're talking about podcasts and responsibility and free speech and things like that. One of the things that does make the way that we do our podcast interesting is because we do present, very often we present content in terms of actual like teaching material, right? And I do think that when you do podcasts based around teaching and educating, like today we're doing a very discussion-based podcast, but generally we are preparing, we are researching, things like that. When you do that kind of stuff, I do think you take on a higher level of responsibility because then you're presenting yourselves as someone who is able to speak meaningfully on a topic. And then you have the ability to mislead people. And I mean, Jesus put a huge emphasis on the responsibility of like teachers, people who are teach others, essentially. And so that's part of, it's not necessarily the fact that I'm like, okay, I can put a dumb conversation out there. That's easy enough, you know, but it weighs much more heavily on me when I'm actually hitting on like serious topics. And I do feel a burden to some extent to present the most responsible and comprehensive and best presented argument for, you know, the cosmological argument or whatever possible. Because I do feel that I am, when I'm doing this kind of podcasting, stepping into a role where I'm guiding others through a difficult topic. And that's one place where like we have made a big effort to put in the work and make sure it is good, you know. Obviously we're still in the growth phase, but that does kind of bear with it some sense of, if you have an audience, you do have a level of responsibility to that audience as well. So
That's a really good point. Like, just because you have a platform to say whatever you want doesn't mean you should.
exactly.
You know, it depends. It all depends on like what the purpose of the pod. I listen to a lot of comedy podcasts, and they can say whatever they want.
Oh yeah.
And you can be like, yeah, well, it's a joke. You know, you shouldn't take it seriously.
Right.
Whereas in this situation, when you're teaching someone, like you said, the cosmological argument, like, it's a big conversation to have.
Yeah.
If you are talking about the cosmological argument, you can't just say whatever you want. That's too big of a
You're
thing
talking
to
about
just
God,
have.
right? You're talking about things that matter. You're talking about Christianity, you know.
Yeah, and so and that doesn't mean don't do it.
Exactly. But you should have a growth mindset where you want to grow and you believe you're capable of growing as you do it.
Do it and do it well.
Exactly.
That's the difference. Do it and do it really, really well.
If you have a gift to be able to do this, you might not do it perfectly. You might not do it all right. But if you're choosing not to do it, you're wasting your talent. And two, if you do it, recognize that you may make mistakes, but it's worth growing through those mistakes if you do want to do it.
I was listening to Paul Washer,
Yeah.
and he was talking about, people ask me, who's your favorite pastor? Who's the greatest pastor in the world? He said, I don't know, because I've never met him.
Yeah.
Because he is probably a pastor of a congregation of 15, 20 people.
Yes. Yeah.
He'll never get any kind of recognition, but he is the best pastor in the whole world. We just don't know who he is.
Because he serves his sheep in his local congregation who are his responsibility, and he pours everything into that. My dad's a pastor, right? And he talks about that. He talks about many ministers are interested in big platforms. And that's not a bad thing. I'm not critiquing ministers who have big platforms. If you have a big platform, it's a gift. But he's saying, I think we'll be surprised in heaven when we see who's been most faithful to Christ, the people who had small platforms, who served in the little ways, who poured themselves out day in and day out, who were not flashy, who were not impressive, who were not necessarily podcast friendly or savvy with the technologies, and who simply served in the place that they were put.
Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely worth thinking about, right? If you think of your personal mission in life, I would encourage you not to start by thinking about what big thing can I do. I would start by thinking about where am I right now and how can I wash the feet of those around me like Christ did in the place you are now. And if you learn in that place to follow faithfully, maybe you're going to be led into something that has a bigger outreach, a bigger impact, right? But don't necessarily go chasing huge impact stuff if you don't have the little things and the heart right.
Yeah, when you're... I was talking to this guy yesterday. My job's cool because I get to meet like 3 to 4 new families every day.
Nice.
And they vary in terms of psychology, in terms of income and where they live and all these things. And I was talking to this guy yesterday, and I was like, man, I'm not nervous to raise kids, but I'll have a different challenge raising kids than my parents did just because of social media.
Oh, yeah.
And
absolutely.
And you see podcasts, and I'm sure Alex, he starting out, he probably probably still does compare himself to other podcasts right now, and it's like, okay,
that's why I stopped listening to other podcasts because it's just like, that's my job now, so I'm sick of listening to all I do is judge myself. I feel like I'm just at work when I'm listening to podcasts.
I think that can be, I think that's a good thing. I think that's a wise place to be. Either you look at a really good podcast that has great production value and they're very organized and all these things, and you're like, dang, I suck. I got to do this better. I got to do it better. And it pushes you to be better.
Yeah.
Or you look at guys that don't care and and maybe it is a Christian podcast and they're just throwing things around and they're not intentional with it, and you're like, okay, you suck. That's a bad podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
That is straight up, that's just a bad podcast. And so I think that's a good thing. But with social media, and I guess for you, like with podcasts, it makes things difficult because there's so much of a comparison game going on.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that when it comes to raising kids and when it comes to I guess just entering this new world,
brave new world.
It's exciting stuff, and I would say, like, don't, for anyone who wants to put anything out there online, like, don't not do it.
Yeah.
Do it, but do it as good as you can.
Absolutely.
And then when you realize you suck, just suck a little bit less.
Yeah. 1% less suck per episode. You're gonna get like way better by like 30
each
episodes.
Day. You're just
not
1%,
much sucking afterwards.
Exactly. We're 50 episodes in. Does that mean we suck 50% less now than when we started? I don't know.
Who knows?
But we like to think that we have grown.
It's a better podcast. I can already tell, like, it's a better podcast now than it was when I first came on there.
Oh yeah.
It's just like you get used to it. You learn how to have a conversation and how to think freely and I mean, starting out, you were like, dude,
we didn't have a routine.
What are we gonna? And now you know the flow, and
we do have a routine.
We have a template.
Yeah.
That we sometimes use.
We've never really got into that, did we?
It's the thought that counts. Yeah. So on the topic, you mentioned you listen to a lot of podcasts. So we're going to move into the stage of the program where we talk about other people's podcasts briefly. So, like, what do you guys listen to? What is podcasting that you have found? And I'm thinking especially in a ministry context, what is podcasting that you found to be good for you, helpful?
I still listen to Tim Keller's podcast.
Questioning Christianity is up there in
it's
my
the
list.
Same 8 episodes.
Fabulous.
But I still listen to it.
Yeah.
Questioning Christianity is whose podcast is it?
Tim Keller.
It's a series of lectures.
A series of lectures he gave on basically, well, he goes through each aspect of it. So morality, justice, hope, meaning, purpose. But yeah, all of those things are like those words. I never really thought like that deeply about them. Like I would just think of hope. I was like, oh, hope. That's just something that people talk about on Christmas. Like, I hope, like now we have hope or whatever. Mm-hmm. But like, what does that actually mean? Well, you really like bite into that word when you think about the Holocaust and what are people going to hold on to? Yeah. Mm-hmm. What do they have left? When they're in the concentration camp, like what's going to pull them through to the end? Or if you talk about the American slave trade, like when the slaves are there, what was that hope that got them through it to the end? Where all those gospel songs that come out, it's all like it kind of has its roots in that slave trade, because that's when people are thinking about the gospel. People are thinking about the heaven, and then now it's like, oh, now we have this concept of hope. It's like that word becomes so much more meaningful when the pressure is on. People are getting hurt and people are getting mistreated. Hope is so much more meaningful now.
And you got that, and these are things that you've thought through because of the Keller podcast.
Yeah. I guess I've thought about morality previously because it may be worldviews too. Well, this is all
he's essentially going through the resources that Christianity offers for hope, for justice, for morality, for like all of these issues that we struggle with in the modern world. And he says Christianity, unlike any other belief system, has the ability to actually meaningfully provide these things, whereas other belief systems can't account for them.
Yeah, and he gives the reasoning for it.
Yeah, and it's specifically aimed at a secular audience.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's been one of the biggest inspirations behind what we do. Our last episode on morality was very, very influenced by Keller's morality lecture. So go back and watch that. And watch Keller's lecture, 10 out of 10.
I think for me to answer that question, one podcast that my parents really got into that I saw, and I first started listening to some things, and I was like, it's a bit weird, it's a bit kooky. But one podcast I've really grown to love is Blurry Creatures podcast. You ever hear about this one? So they talk about, they're Christian. They talk about things that are pretty taboo to talk about, specifically in regards to like the spiritual world. They're similar to disruption because, or maybe they're similar to like the concept of disruption because you hear these concepts being talked about and you're like, wait, that's a bit weird. What do you mean? And for example, you mentioned like conspiracy theories, but for example, the conversation they have is about Bigfoot.
Yeah.
And if you see all these people that say they have these Bigfoot sightings, like if you were a Christian looking at that from a Christian worldview, how could you somehow explain if that were to be real?
Bigfoot is the Nephilim.
Bigfoot is the Nephilim. Exactly. That's it.
I've heard that
it's
Jacob before.
It's like a type of, because we have, they talk about people like different situations in the Middle East and different stories in the Middle East and not even just the Middle East, but in different places in Africa and places that have a lot less technology than we do. And darker spirits engage with humans differently than they do in the United States. Whereas you're not just going to see someone floating down the street in the United States because everyone is going to get their phones and they're going to be recording it the whole time.
Yeah.
And now it's like the demons are like, well, gig is up. Yeah,
I think there's something to be said for Western Christian culture, secularism. The kind of evil that we deal with here is not necessarily the kind of evil that is dealt with in the rest of the world. I think there's definitely something to that. That being said,
here it's more intellectually based, or it's more like battles between like the evidence and how do you interpret it. I think as a Western.
Exactly.
That being said, if I had a nickel for every time somebody blamed something on the Nephilim, I would have a lot of money.
I think Stefan is really sick.
We like to leverage the
like
vague
nickels.
Bible passages to help us explain things. That's one of those things where I'm always kind of like,
deeply
maybe.
suspicious.
But then again, at the same time, are those not helpful to explain
I
things?
think they're good conversations to have because if you say I don't want to have the conversation, you're not getting anywhere.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I'm glad that there's people talking about that kind of stuff.
It's at least like a starting block to have a conversation about things like that. Because if you just have like a naturalistic worldview and
nothing supernatural can be explained at all. You just write everything off. And I think as Christians, it's
except for creation and the resurrection.
Yeah,
those are the only two things that you can it's obvious, but everything else, nothing.
Yeah, we
nothing
basically
else is
claim to have a supernaturalist worldview, and then we assume that none of the things that we experience are supernatural. Which, like, on the one hand, it's important to be critical and thoughtful. On the other hand, if you're a supernaturalist, why do you have the epistemology of a naturalist? Why does every single one of your explanations for anything have to be naturalistic?
Exactly.
It shouldn't be. Now, obviously, you should be discerning on how you try to explain different phenomena. But if you're not willing to have the conversation about the supernatural as a Christian, why do you believe in the supernatural?
Yeah.
Like, isn't the point of Christianity, that stuff isn't all there is, that there is a God surrounded by legions of angels, and that there are things in this world that are cosmic and evil and not made of nature. Like, did that just stop happening when the Bible stopped being written? Or are we insulated from a serious part of reality in the West?
That's what the Blurry Creatures podcast is so good at talking about. They bring all those things to light. They talk about how if you are a believer, you're not. You can't just believe that, maybe creation and then the resurrection, with maybe the exception of like the plagues of and some of these big things that happen in the Old Testament. Like, we'll believe with those things, but that's it.
Yeah,
it's like, well.
Supernaturalistic minimalism. As few miracles as possible.
Right. Yeah. And the thing is that that's really just in Western culture.
Yeah.
It
makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, believers in Africa, in the Middle East, like they experience these things more frequently than we do. For example, I mean, very rarely in the United States do you hear stories about people that say they were converted because Christ came to them in a dream.
Right.
Whereas that happens all the time in the Middle East.
I've heard of that.
Muslims.
There's a Muslim, and then a missionary comes by and they say, have you heard of Jesus? And they say, they look at him like strange, like, he in a dream yesterday, and that happens really frequently in the Middle East.
Yeah. And
it's just a different culture, and the thing is that these spirits, the antagonistic spirits, they've been around for thousands of years, and so they're a lot more clever than we are. They're pretty crafty.
Yeah.
And so they know how to distract Christians in the West, and then how to distract Christians in the East, and they're different things.
C.S. Lewis wrote about this in the Screwtape Letters, and he wrote in one passage, he says, we really have, and he's writing from the perspective of the devils, and it's like we have really two options. We can get them to believe that we don't exist, or we can get them to worship us. And one day, and the devil is crossing his fingers, hoping one day we can get an atheistic magician who does both at the same time, but we're still working on it. And then you look at Satanism in the modern West, and you're kind of like,
I bet those demons read Screwtape Letters.
Yeah. Like, I don't like how that works. That's not great.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So that's what I'd recommend people listen to. Of course, you got to, just like any podcast you listen to that's not scripture,
be discerning.
Be very discerning of it. Yeah.
Be discerning of the things we say. We talk a lot of nonsense.
No, don't.
We talk a lot.
Listen to everything we
trust
say.
Me. Just trust me.
We are the exception.
We are literally writing scripture right now. No, I'm just kidding.
Whoa, dude! I didn't say that. No. Alex said it. I didn't.
This
say that.
is not a disruption-approved message. Yeah, I've also listened to a lot of Cultish. They do a great job covering cults and other religions from a Christian perspective.
That's spooky.
Absolutely brilliant. They are so well researched. They are so well done. Excellent resource. 100% top notch. Recommend. They have episodes on historical cults in America, on the development of cults like around the world. They deal with other religions and some of their belief systems and things like that. They deal with Christians who end up creating very cultish atmospheres in their churches. Fantastic content. Another one that I like to listen to is History of the Early Church podcast.
Okay.
And he's going through the history of the church, starting like after Jesus' resurrection and going up to like Constantine or something. Okay. And it's been really cool. It's been extremely educational. So maybe check that one out.
Okay.
It's very funny because I was never a podcast guy. I did not listen to podcasts. If somebody sent me a video or a podcast over like 30 minutes, even if it was 30 minutes, I'd be like, ugh. It was funny. I have a friend, Tim, from Bible study, who was like, oh, you should listen to this episode of Joe Rogan or something like that. And he'd send me this long podcast
4 hours long.
It's like 3 or 4 hours. And I'm like, I don't want to. And then when you invited me on the podcast, I did a bunch of prep. I listened to all of Keller's stuff. I listened to a bunch of Disruption episodes, some of which you were on. And suddenly...
You became like the #1 podcast listener.
I became a
podcast
host, and I became like a podcast listener on a regular basis. So despite all of Tim's work trying to get me into podcasts, it was Alex at the end of the day who got me. So one of the great ironies.
This is so random and weird, but it's funny.
Alex, you're good at like making things happen.
Yes.
You actually really are good at making
Yes.
things happen. Like
It's true.
sometimes
Yeah, I don't know.
I think you're a bit more of a steamroller than you think you are. And like
You're driven. You're a driven
yeah,
person.
You are a really, I mean, it takes a lot to set all of this stuff up.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think you got to give yourself more credit than you do, because you're a very theoretical person. You know, like, I think this makes sense in my mind and this seems right. And a lot of times, even like the way you talk, it's you just kind of like you don't really have a filter. You know?
That's actually true.
You don't have a filter
don't have
at
a
all.
Fact check
And so-
true. Snopes
Nope.
proved.
But so it's interesting because you can be a steamroller and just like push through things, but you do it more often than you think you do, I think. And so I would encourage you to just like keep going and keep pushing through. You know, keep breaking through, because you're better at it than most 20. How old are you?
23.
Yeah, most
Child.
23. How old are you?
26.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're better at pushing through, doing difficult things like that than most people your age. So
Thank you. Yeah.
don't stop doing it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a big part of what makes this work. Like, I would not have started doing something like this, and I would never have started something like
Yep.
this. So it's your push through to make this happen and make it continue to happen. That's what enables me to do any of this. So 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You should
Would
rate
strongly recommend me.
you should rate your own Spotify podcast 5 stars now that
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
that we've really hit these milestones.
I've always rated it like 4 stars or 3 stars because I thought it was like okay.
I think he's actively bringing our review score down on Spotify, which is very funny.
Intentionally,
because
bringing
he's
it
the
down.
producer.
That's
yeah.
wild.
He just feels guilty that it's so highly
Yeah.
rated that he's bringing it down himself.
Well, I mean, when I compare it to other podcasts, I'm like, Disruption's okay, but it's just not. I wouldn't put it 5 stars yet. I'm not sure if I would recommend it to everyone.
Come on now, man.
I gave Disruption a 5-star rating.
Yeah. So I think that's what.
Speaking of which, rate, like, and subscribe. Leave a comment below.
Or
What's up, guys?
Somebody
What's
will
up, guys?
eat your. I don't know.
Whoa, dude.
Somebody will eat your dog if you
Well,
don't.
Alex,
Yeah,
one thing.
yeah, somebody will
one
eat
thing you need to think about though is that what I would encourage you to do is be more of a like lean into being a steamroller, you know, and just like why not call it the #1, you know, Christian podcast in Michigan, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, because the thing is if you look at people who are just crazy good at doing things, like Elon Musk, you know, all of this guy, you know, he does like 7 impossible things all at once in the same day.
He's
out
like
of his
flying in an
mind.
airplane, just like
Yeah,
going
out of
from
his mind.
Tesla
Yeah,
to
kinda
space.
scares me.
Yeah.
But I mean, he's the kind of guy that's like, I can do that. Yeah, no, I'm going to do that.
Move fast, break stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like, those are the guys that really get things done. And I think because you're so good at discerning and like wanting to be wise with the people that you have on here, and you carefully edit things, you want things to look beautiful. We're not just like sitting in your basement in a couch. We're in a nice studio. You know, like you're really intentional with those things. And so give yourself more credit than you do because it's
Kudos to
have a
Joyce
good
for the
setup.
studio.
Thanks, Joyce.
Thanks,
Well done.
Thanks, Joyce.
10 out of 10. That's the first thing. The first episode I was on, I was like, wow, this is fantastic. And I
You
just
look
met-
at the rest of the church building and you're like, how is this room existing?
Exactly.
Like the architecture does not translate to the rest of the building.
No, yes, it
think
does. It does too.
I think we
It does.
spent 10 minutes of the first episode I was on just talking about this wall.
Really?
Yeah.
It was pretty funny.
Yeah. But no, man, you're doing good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
I do have to work on my filter though. That almost got me in trouble a couple of times.
It happens to the best of us. It's a growth
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah. It starts with, okay, so big tip for just life in general. Don't just, if you have a problem with somebody, don't email or text. Try to talk to them in person
Yes.
because that got me in a lot of trouble.
Good life message.
Big wisdom.
That's
At
a
my
good
new
life
job,
message.
It got me in a lot of trouble.
Big wisdom from Alex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool beans. Do you want to
Do you
do
want-
an outro or do you want me to do an outro?
I think.
Do you have anything you want to wrap up?
If you do, I would talk about how, because a lot of this, what I realize, a lot of this conversation is talking about kind of like the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And
I feel like that could be a whole episode.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm not good enough to say anything about about scripture, and I'm not good enough to put any kind of ideas out there.
Yeah.
And no one's ever done anything good by saying that.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't mean you have to start a podcast and start a some big channel on online or anything, but the point is to like say something and go do something.
Yeah.
And I think God honors that. This conversation has made me think about the parable of the talents.
Absolutely. Yeah.
One guy was given a ton.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, freaking Keller. That's wild stuff.
Yeah.
He's been given all of his talents when he was alive, and he, gave them all back to the master. But just because Keller has 10 and you have 1 doesn't mean you're like, I'm gonna go bury it for you.
I'm gonna go put it in a hole in the ground.
Yeah. That sounds right.
Yeah.
That sounds like a great investment.
God is mean, and if I do something wrong, he's just gonna hit me over the head.
Gosh dang. Which is funny because in the parable he does.
Well, he does because he buries the talent, not because he tries his best and fails.
That's exactly right.
It's so weird because he thinks that. I mean, in that parable, does he think that
he believes God is
going
graceless?
to pity him?
He believes that God
it?
is graceless, and therefore he lives as if God is graceless, and he gets punished. If he had believed in the grace of God and tried to faithfully follow him, even if he hadn't received good results, I think that's something we often need to think about. Like, God is gracious. God works in and through our failures.
If you believe it. Yeah. Right?
Exactly.
You walk by faith.
You need to trust him, not the results of your works. When we did our episode on evangelism, one of the things Jordan emphasized so much is that it's not your results that matter, it's your faithfulness that matters. God is in charge of the results. He's the one working out his plan in the world, not you.
Yeah.
That's right.
And God works all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. That means you and your failures. That means you and your mistakes. That means you and your, low quality productions sometimes, Not you that your that your productions are low quality, but
I just think it's funny. Yeah.
I think we got to think about the graciousness of God and the gifts that he gives us, and genuinely believe that he is able to work through us, because self-loathing is not humility. That is not the same thing. Okay? You have to genuinely believe that God is working in your life, and believing that God can't work through your life is not being humble. It's being insulting to your maker, I think.
I agree.
Cool. Catch you on the flip side.
Stay safe out there, folks.
Adios.
Thank you for listening to the Disruption Podcast, where we disrupt the culture and center Christ. If you enjoyed the show, please consider subscribing on YouTube or following us on Spotify. You can also follow us on Instagram. We'll see you on the next episode.